Hello, and welcome to EnSafe's webinar today entitled Key Employer Considerations for Return to Work Plans. I'm Mike Palmer. I'm a principal with EnSafe, and I'll be your host for this, the first of EnSafe's EHS webinar series. So the theme of this webinar really came from states right now across the country are in the throes of reopening plans, partial or full, that are challenging essential and non-essential employers with putting together, crafting and enacting return to work plans. What makes this even more challenging is there is varied and timely different guidance coming out from government and the scientific community regarding the pillars that we are looking for as far as distancing and screening and cleaning and disinfecting. So it's ever-changing environment. So what this does is it challenges us as employers to put together these work plans without jeopardizing the safety of our workforces, their families, the public, our customers, and the whole lot of people that we interact with. So if you find yourself in that situation, you've come to the right place, because today I have a panel of 7 EHS professionals that have many pearls of wisdom about the strategies that they have employed thus far and going into the future for their essential and fully returning of the workforce. So we're going to do this a little different, and that's one of the reasons I'm kind of excited about this. Is we're going to use our esteemed and distinguished panelists to answer an array of questions that I've worked with them to put together that we think that the audience participants on this webinar are confronted with as EHS managers and panelists. As EHS manager and business leaders. So I'm going to introduce individually our panelists as I am pointing questions at them. I'm also going to turn up the fire and challenge them a little bit in the second round of questions, where we'll introduce a little bit of levity and humanity into this very serious topic, but it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of humanity in these days and age. And then I'll ask you as an audience, if you have questions and answers, to go to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A icon, and you can put your questions in. And we'll try to either time those. Leo Old is going to be our host today, and he'll time those questions with the actual panelists, or he'll keep them towards the end. And then we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end to answer questions. So our panelists represent varied geographies, industries, and services. And we think that with that background, it's going to be a pretty good array of answers and questions and answers that are going to help you as you return to work. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get started. Ed Rebar is going to field our first question. Ed is the Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety for Avery Dennison. So Ed, here's my question to you. For the last few months, as EHS professionals, we've been inundated with all kinds of information out there from government, CDC, WHO, all those kinds of groups and scientific communities on guidance for all the protocols we're supposed to follow in returning to work. As Avery Dennison, what did you guys find most reliable and helpful as a way of references that you use in developing your restart plans that you used?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So a couple things. First of all, many of our businesses were deemed essential, so probably 80% of our operations never shut down. We had some manufacturing and most of our office shut down. However, to your point, it was very challenging for us because unlike typical EHS regulations that we get where it's PSM or lockout, where things are very crystal clear with information and standards, this was something completely different that we're just trying to find a source of truth for much, as you said, and get the best available data. We have large manufacturing operations in China. We're in a company that likes to share best practices, and they actually shut down over Chinese New Year, so they had a couple weeks to prepare, where the rest of it, we just had to jump right into it. And the only thing with sharing information from the China facilities was it was so command and control because that's the way the government is. It wasn't really practical for implementation in our sites. We were able to glean some of it, but we really struggled with getting information. So we started out initially with the WHO and kind of progressed to the CDC. We found the WHO not being as detailed and even kind of waffling a little bit on some of their guidance on face masks and things of that nature. We really resonated around the CDC. They were a little bit more direct. They also changed during a course, but it seemed to be a little bit more science behind their guidance. They had a lot of good videos to support, a lot of fact sheets, and we used that as our primary source. But also, we operate in 60 different countries, so if there was something else that came out in a regulation, we would glean that as well and rely on our global team to take information, and we set minimum expectations for AREI globally and also leave some flexibility for the site. So we basically rely a lot on CDC, as well as, we've been researching more recently with talking about face shields and whether there's nothing out there right now from any organization. So we've been looking into the researchers and trying to glean more information from specialists. We were looking at some information from MIT, and it's been a hit or miss kind of thing. It's changing daily, just as this whole coronavirus thing, it changes from week to week, month to month, day to day. And even now we're seeing the touching of surfaces. We went through a whole thing of cleaning and disinfecting, and now they're saying, well, that's not as important. So it's a moving target, but we continually are relying mostly on CDC and from learning institutions as our primary source.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've heard that answer pretty consistently with other companies as well. All right, my next question, we lost our panelists for it, and coincidentally enough, and I'm sure our other panelists and people on this in the same situation, he had 3 positive cases that came within facilities this morning, and he is dealing with the aftermath of that right now and getting cleanup contractors and whatnot in. So I'm going to take care of his question for him. I've actually had it during a couple other podcasts and webinars I've done. But the next question, what it deals with is that as you look at the guidance that's coming from OSHA and coming from states, there's a number that have actually required disaster preparedness response plans. So OSHA actually has a COVID guidance document where they actually have written a requirement for companies to develop site-specific, company-specific response plans. So my question really was related to, how have you done this and how have you found these helpful? And what I'm going to relate to you is kind of my experience in working in EnSafe, working with clients and assistance with these plans. What we have found them to be the most helpful with clients and where they've found them is making them specific, and really 3 areas. So the first area is screening of employees. So the whole determination of who you're bringing back in, and I understand essential businesses, you already had a certain number, but as you return more of the workforce, following state requirements, but also looking at CDC protocol regarding people that have symptomatic and not tested, or tested before and determined to be without symptoms. But anyway, the whole screening process, including temperature screening, and how you're providing notification for that. So the whole thing of who's coming back into the workplace, making that specific, even to the way of temperature screening. We're working with a number of clients that, they do temperature screening, but they haven't really thought through the whole, okay, now someone is high for temp. What are you doing? How do you handle that? Do you hand them information? Do you talk to them? Do you provide on-site? What are you doing with that? So some kind of plan that specifically states what you're doing with that for people coming back in. The next part is now they're in. So looking at personal hygiene, wearing of masks in public areas, social distance, reconfiguring your workplace to those high traffic areas, shutting down some areas where people collect. So, again, the CDC protocol, as Ed mentioned, is very general in that, right? It says, public areas, refrain 10 people, whatever the case may be. But you got to really look at where it affects your workplace. How are you grouping, and where do you have those high traffic areas? But something written specific to those areas. And then last thing, cleaning and disinfection. So increased cleaning for high touch surfaces and whatnot, but identifying what those surfaces are, if they're, microwaves and refrigerators or doorknobs or whatever the case they may be. It could be office equipment, copiers, but whatever they are, identifying those high touch surfaces. identifying the increased cleaning, and then what are you going to do if you do have a positive COVID case? And what are you doing for cleaning, deep cleaning, and disinfection and verification of that disinfection? So that's the kind of stuff that needs to really be put into a written plan so that when it does happen, you have a way that you're going to approach that. It may be it may change it, but at least you've got an initial plan put together for how you're going to do that. All right. So my next question is for Mike DuPont. Mike is the Director of Global Health and Safety for Rayonier Advanced Materials. Mike, Rayonier is like several other companies represented on this call, and Ed just talked about Avery being in Asia. That is global, right? So you got the added complexity of dealing with this on a global level and just not a domestic level. Can you give us some strategies that you guys employed that were effective in managing safety on more of a global platform?
All right, Mike, can you hear me?
Yep, here you go.
Well, hello to everyone on the call. I think the first strategy that we implemented was a task team for COVID-19. We had the leaders of various cities from around the world on the call every morning at 7:30. That call basically lasts a little bit less than an hour. And it's a daily routine, and we check in on the various countries that we go through the gamut. I think that's been a strategy that allowed us to stay in tune and to connect with individuals. But what I think you have to realize is when you're in that mode, different countries are going to be at different places, right? Whether it be the path or the progression of the virus itself, or if it's the preparation that the country has done based on their leadership. Also just that sensitivity and that severity that they're facing at the time. I'll give you a good example. We were focused on temperature taking early on to determine if that's something we wanted to do. We debated that with our health side, our legal side, and we had a nice thought out process. We went over in the morning meeting several times, and we decided not to temperature. And I know some companies on the call probably are temperature testing. We decided not to for a host of reasons. And then that went out, and I don't know, maybe a week later, France says we're temperature testing, and we're like, what? So it just takes you back, right? Like, were you not on those calls every morning? What happened? And so they basically said, well, the government said we had. And so, okay, fine. So let's have a meeting to figure out how to do it right, as you mentioned on your previous message, right? We just don't temperature test. You got a lot of what ifs after that and preparations for, are you creating medical records? Are you, dealing with false positives? But afterwards, it really became, I guess the mystery solved itself, and then it was the communications in those 7:30 meetings weren't necessarily going as deep into the organization as we thought. And so from a global perspective, you've always got to assume that the person on the call is not communicating deep into the organization, right? And I think that was our big one. Once we got that, reason prevailed, and the communications around the issues surrounding temperature taking, I guess, pretty much made the plant manager question, do we have to, with all these issues associated with that? He then talked to a local government official, and he says, no, you don't have to. That doesn't apply to your industry. It's more for the medical industry. So there was miscommunication there as well. And so really, I think it's around knowing the communication method, how deep you go into the organization or into the country for that matter, and really just being focused on getting not only to the person on the call, but to the plant leader and then to the supervisors with different forms, written form, videos, group calls, all of it has to take place. We have a large barrier to jump over when it comes to language barriers, et cetera, and country barriers.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways I got from when you're talking is the communication part. I mean, that's needed when you're big and spread domestically, but man, globally, it is even a a bigger challenge.
And we did a quick survey through our HR team, and it was basically, do you want more or less information? Are you getting enough? And I think it was a positive response. Most people said, yeah, I know what's going on, I get enough. But you never can take it for granted. You have to go deep into the organization to ensure the protocols are known, the steps that we're going to take as a company are known. And, you know, as one of our lawyers has said recently, lawsuits in the U.S. are starting to crank up. Right? So you have to do your due diligence to ensure that you're taking care of your company's best interests.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, my next question is for Norman Ford. Norm is the VP of Compliance Products for SkillSoft. And a little bit different than some of the other panelists we have here, SkillSoft is a leader in online compliance training and EHS training. And I thought it'd be good to get Norm's perspective specifically as it relates to, if you look at what OSHA and CDC and WHO and everybody have, one of the things that's been really consistent is all have insisted on the importance of training for essential workforce that's staying in place, and then people as they return, right? There's a lot of information out there and people have been just inundated with it, right? So it's really important as an employer, we'd be very specific with what information we feel employees need to keep them safe for their particular job and what they're doing. So my question to Norm is, you know, what's been your experience thus far from SkillSoft clients and people requesting online training? What have you heard from them related to COVID training?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for inviting me, and hello, everyone. Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, our utilization increased by 300%. As soon as the country started locking down, we saw utilization of all of our products just go through the roof, and that's just a direct reflection of, you know, people working from home, taking care of their training, getting the information they needed to eventually return to work, but also to continue operations while they're working from home. You know, when we develop our training curriculum for the year, we actually start in November, December timeframe. So we had our roadmap laid out and ready to go when all this started to unfold. And we basically had to start over again in the February timeframe, the January, February timeframe. And we were watching the COVID-19 actually, you know, back then it was the coronavirus in December. We were actually watching that evolve because we had a couple of courses that we knew we were probably going to have to update. We have a pandemic flu course and an infectious diseases course. And so we were watching that to see how it evolved, to make sure that we were on track as soon as, you know, the information became available, to be able to update those courses. And so once the CDC came out with some pretty stable guidance on and named it, you know, COVID-19, we started updating those courses, and we actually released a COVID-19 course within a matter of weeks. We found very quickly that we needed to not only release a version of it for North America, but also a global course. So we released a global COVID-19 course, and those courses are available in 10 languages. And that's probably our most highly utilized courses. We made those courses free to everyone, so you don't have to be a SkillSoft customer. Along with our business continuity content, which we already had off the shelf and ready to go. So we SkillSoft put together a curriculum of business continuity training that we posted on YouTube and that we posted available for our sites for anyone to see. So some of the things that our customers have been coming to us for and that we've made adjustments for in our roadmap are topics, and we're actually developing these and releasing these right now, are topics like filtered face piece respirators and masks. What's the difference between the two? What are the requirements if you're wearing, you know, a surgical mask versus an N95 respirator? Things like resuming retail and restaurant operations, contact tracing, workplace disinfection, hierarchy of controls. If you're a business, no matter what kind of business you're in, you should follow some type of hierarchy of controls to design what's appropriate for you, that's tailored for you. And so there needs to be a structure, a process in place, and that's what that course does for them. And then also workplace hierarchy of controls for and return to work for manufacturing. And finally, ADA and the EEOC has really published a lot of clarification on things as it relates to pandemic. You know, what if someone has a pre-existing condition, employee comes to their supervisor and says, I don't really feel comfortable coming to work because I have a pre-existing condition. what does these laws allow for the employer to do for that particular employee. And then to get to another point that you'd mentioned, the biggest thing that we see with customers is that the requirements differs by jurisdiction and demographic. And what I mean by that is sometimes it can differ by city. Sometimes it can differ by state, county, country, you name it. It's just different across the board. And so the challenge that a lot of companies are having is, one is how to address those requirements through policies, protocols, and procedures. But then the second part, and where they've been coming to us on, is how do we train and inform our employees on these various requirements? How do we target what's the right information for those employees in those particular demographics? So we have this tool called Certitude, which allows them to take policies, procedures, what have you, guide documents, essentially create a training program within a matter of minutes, and they can either assign that to an group of individuals, and they can distribute to those individuals, and they can either say, okay, I need an e-signature to verify that you've read this, or I need just an attestation that says, I've read this, I understand it, I'm good to go. Or you may want to ask questions, you may want to formalize it. All those responses get thrown back into a learning management system for documentation to ensure that they've gotten that information, that knowledge. And then finally, one of the big things is companies want to know how their employees are doing. So they need a reporting mechanism. Are these controls working? Is there opportunities for improvement? Even the situation where, hey, I need to report a situation where there may have been a possible exposure, or I may have someone who's positive. How do you report those? And again, this tool allows them to do that. It's available in 40 languages. So it's a tool that a lot of our clients are using to promulgate this program, throughout their entire network and infrastructure. So it's been a crazy several weeks, Mike. It's just been amazing. In terms of the work has just shot through the roof. I've talked to several of my colleagues. We've literally lost track of what day it is. And we find that, when we finally get to Friday, it's like we all think it's like, oh, I thought it was Wednesday. And I'm sure a lot of folks are seeing that as well, but it's just, it's been a crazy ride so far.
Yeah, I expected to increase to 300%. I didn't, but it's interesting, the different requests that have come in, and I'm a big proponent of actually a multi type of training platform that involves everything from instructor-led to online and whatnot. It'll be just interesting as we return to this new normal, what that takes. I think training is going to be one of the big ones impacted for EHS professionals. That's going to be one of our big, I think, impacts of how we have to figure out or maneuver our way to this new normal. All right. Thanks, Norm. My next question is for Brittany Herman. Brittany is a safety specialist for our local Knoxville Utilities Board. And Brittany, unlike some of you others that have a manufacturing environment, she is over safety for an environment of utilities that involves a very mobile and publicly interactive workforce that is looking at all types of electrical, water, gas, utilities. They're spread out day to day. So my question to you, Brittany, is really just with that. So how have you had to do some differences with the traditional CDC, social distancing, personal hygiene, cleaning and disinfecting? How have you guys adjusted that for that very mobile and publicly interactive workforce?
Yeah, so like you said, we are very mobile. We have about 1,100 employees, and that's spread out on all different campuses and 5 wastewater and water plants. So that's all over this service territory. And first we put office workers, we had them work from home, and we closed our payment centers. So that limited customer interaction. And then also we stopped disconnects of service. So we didn't have to go to disconnect any services at customers' homes for, late payment or non-payment, things like that. But we are spread out, so that was kind of an advantage also, because we're kind of in these small crews spread out in the field all over across Knoxville. So luckily, we did have a good initial stock of cleaning supplies just due to working with wastewater, for for the most part. So we had a lot of hand sanitizer and bleach especially on hand. For that first initial wave, we did start running out, so we kind of had to get creative. We gave out bar soap. We ordered hundreds of bar soap, and the guys filled up their Gatorade coolers with water on the back of the trucks and just washed their hands with bar soap and water on the back of the truck out in the field. And then we also had our customer service center. They had a script that they would have to read. So we would pre-screen customers before going to their house. So they would ask the questions for that customer before we sent the technician over. Have you been traveling international? Have you had any illness in your family, any exposure to the virus, things like that? So we could kind of pre-screen the customers on the front end of that situation. And then we also sent out kits with supplies to all the crews, in their trucks. They had the hand sanitizer. We ran out of wipes pretty quickly too. So then we just kind of had to hand, gallon jugs of bleach and some empty spray bottles and say, here, make your own 10-to-1 solution and use some paper towels. And that's going to be your cleaning solution. But those are kind of some of the creative stuff we came up with.
All right, good. That's a great adaptation. And I think that's, we all are taking general guidance and then trying to make it most specific and apply to our workplaces. And I think that's finding the general guidance is not a problem. There's tons of information out there, but making that, trickling it down and getting it to where it applies to us is the challenge. All right. Thanks, Brittany. My next question is for Dave Harrington. Dave is the Vice President of Environmental Safety and Health for Rust-Oleum. So Dave, Rust-Oleum has been in operation for, according to the website, like nearly 100 years, right? And you guys got some real unique operational challenges because of your varied business platforms, from retail to manufacturing and distribution centers and whatnot. So I could see, and global as well, but the communication must be very difficult because you have so many different types of business platforms. What have you guys found to be most effective in communicating throughout the organization during this time?
Yeah, Mike, you're right. And so really, I think from a communication standpoint, we just took our existing pandemic plan and we dusted it right off, and all the incident command structure that we already had in place, it just went right to work. And no, actually, that's not like any of us. I think it was Muhammad Ali that said, your best plan goes out the window when you first get punched in the nose, right? So this was kind of a punch in the nose, and I think it really tested our communication structure and made us kind of come up with some new stuff and create as we went along. The good news is, like some others on this call have mentioned, we were determined to be essential business. All of our operations stayed running, and not only that, due to the nature of a lot of our businesses in the DIY field, and people, when the Home Depots and Menards and Lowe's and places like that just went crazy, our business went through the roof. So we had the additional challenge of really running at an extremely high level. Our business was going gangbusters, and at the same time, we were having to communicate all these things. So that was good, but certainly a challenge. We had, I think I would say, a couple of important key principles that really permeated throughout all of our communication structure that you really, I think, we did well to keep in mind. Number one is always make sure people know that we're going to put their safety first. And it's always going to be, putting people first. We're not going to put our people at risk. And that's really important. And the second part is be empathetic and realize that people, their fears are legitimate. They're hearing a lot of different information, receiving a lot of different inputs from different sources that isn't just coming from us. That's very real to them and to everybody at all levels of the organization. So, I think what that led to was, communicate often and communicate accurately and just be real with people and really assure people that we're putting their interests first. And we're not going to put anybody at risk. So having said that, we just kind of set up a tiered meeting sort of a structure. So at our parent company at the corporate level has an executive leadership team that meets frequently, I think weekly at a minimum. Every one of the operating companies, of which Rust-Oleum and DAP are one, has membership on that team, as well as legal and EH&S and ops and everybody on there, and HR. And then that cascades down to the operating level. So our executive leadership team meets weekly. Those members then go down to the functional level and departmental level, and this meeting structure cascades throughout the organization, and right on down to the shop floor. And I will also mention internationally. So we also have established weekly international meetings to connect with our European counterparts, our Australian, South African counterparts, all of that, to see what's going on there. And in a way, this has actually been beneficial because honestly, we've never had this much structure and communication with our international partners as we have now. So it kind of was a benefit in that respect. We have a real good relationship and communication with what's going on really around the world. And I think the second thing, by having that sort of cascading meeting structure, it allows a two-way communication. So it isn't just about policies coming down from on high, although to some degree that's certainly part of it. But it's also figuring out kind of what's going on the floor and being able to be flexible and adapt going back in the other direction. So as we implement our policy on requiring the use of face coverings or taking temperatures when we were, introducing that, the feedback back through the organization in the other direction was really helpful, because if a plant, for example, came up with a good way to take temperatures, which they did, and they built a barrier and they put a hole in it and they did something special or unique that was, pretty cool, that came right back through the organization, and we were able to apply that very rapidly across all our sites. So it actually has been a really good and effective communication structure. And then the other thing is consistent and frequent messaging from our CEO, both at the RPM level and at the consumer group Rust-Oleum level, keeping people up to date on how the business is going, how the whole COVID response is going, and everything that we're doing. So I just really think people have been greatly assured by the amount of information that we've got coming out, and staying ahead of things and adapting and being flexible to things. And most importantly, knowing that we're doing everything we possibly can to keep them safe as we are essentially continuing to run and successfully operate our business.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, that's especially like the part about making sure you're filling the information before it's being asked, right? So and then the sharing of best practices is fantastic. Part of me wonders that there'll be a dichotomy as we turn to a new normal of somewhat of a relief from not having to meet constantly and have calls constantly, but then there'll be another part that'll be like, okay, we picked up a couple good practices here. We need to probably keep some of that, right? So I think that'll be a real challenge, because I know a lot of us would love to cross off meetings and calls that we currently have scheduled all the time now. Thanks. All right, my next question is for John Knopf. John is the Environment, Safety, and Health Manager for View Incorporated. John, we've heard from several panelists about working safely and managing the pandemic from a corporate level. At the individual plant site, what strategies have you found to be maybe a little bit different or most effective that is really at the plant level? What's worked for you?
That's right. Success and failure. So great question, Mike. I think your question boils down to what's going to be your leadership efforts at your location or at any location. I think the easiest thing for any of us to do is to simply make out a set of rules to be followed in an effort to help keep COVID-19 out of the workplace. But the hardest thing to do is to convince personnel that the rules are actually designed for their protection, and adherence to the rules is not about policies, programs, and procedures, but instead it's about them sharing care, concern, and compassion for their coworkers and their coworkers' families. Many of the basic rules that we've all put in place, all companies, they're becoming kind of a socially charged topic right now, whether we're talking about wearing a facial covering or monitoring colleagues' temperatures multiple times throughout the day. Any of these employer steps that we all use to make up a layered approach can be viewed as either not necessary or just a dog and pony show in the eyes of the workforce that's returning, unless we bother to spend the time educating them on why we are taking these prudent steps to protect them from this changing pandemic, because we all know the news every night. There's competing opinions and competing studies that are released every day that may make your efforts at the plant level seem as if it's not valid anymore. So we have a mixed workforce, and it consists of both technical support, engineering service, as well as a production force that makes our products. And we were deemed essential early on, and we did not shut down production. However, we did send our support staff and engineering colleagues to work from home in the initial phases of the pandemic, and we're currently starting to bring them back to our locations, but not before we thought about, worked together as teams and prepared training presentations, hosted different virtual group meetings to help educate them on the fact that the workplace is going to look different when they get back, whether we're talking about controlled traffic flow patterns or temperature check stations or social distancing. Everything's changing. So additionally, we have to take time to explain and ensure that all of our workforce understands that this is not over. Even if orders are being lifted in states, municipalities, we got to remain vigilant in our efforts to keep this out of our workplace and protect our workforce, especially because someone could contract COVID-19 all the while being asymptomatic. And, what do we do at that particular point? All of these explanations and expectations should be clearly laid out in, as you mentioned earlier, the COVID-19, your response plan. Just like you guys that are listening right now, as well as myself, we all have questions and we seek answers. Your workforce has the same. Each employer, I think we should expect to be prepared with a well laid out plan that's going to help address those questions, make sure it's clearly communicated to the workforce, and they should be encouraged. As a matter of fact, we should go the extra mile to pull questions out of our returning colleagues to make sure that they are not just a follower of our COVID-19 plans, but they, in turn, when they return to their workstations in their offices or the work production floor, that they become advocates of those plans. So it's been a mixed bag, but nothing was effective just as a rule. It has to have the rule with the training and the explanation and the buy-in so that people fully understand what are we trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to accomplish, especially when you're at the plant level, is really important, because that's when it's going to get down to the brass facts of it. Thanks, John. Our last on our list, but first in our heart, panelist, Max Bertram. Max is the second-year director of the Tennessee Valley section of the American Industrial Hygiene Association, and an executive team member of the Tennessee Safety Fest, which is one of the largest free health and safety conferences in the world. Max, the COVID-19 quarantine and social distancing restrictions have put a halt on our association meetings and conferences and whatnot. What's been your experience thus far, kind of going forward, or for alternative methods for these association meetings and conferences? What have you seen so far?
Well, I mean, it makes sense that integration of remote attendance technology is going to depend on the type of event and the size. If you are having, local chapter meetings, things like that, where you've got, less than 20, less than 30 people, something like this, where you're using a Zoom or Teams or WebEx, one of those, it's pretty seamless to integrate. It's not that big a deal. But, to paint a picture, when we're talking about Safety Fest, you've got an event where you've got 1,200 attendees over a week period, 100 different classes going on, people come from 30 different states that have attended. Then it becomes more cumbersome to try to plan, so you have to start taking into account just the different aspects of the venue itself. Can it handle, does it have the broadband capabilities to handle 10, 12 live streaming activities going on simultaneously? How do you handle, and you guys did a great job with this, by the way, with IT, setting things up if you have a snafu. Having one person at a small event, a single event where you've got a single speaker we've all experienced that. Somebody comes up and works on it, but if you've got 10 of these going on at the same time, how do you plan on that? So it's difficult. It's one of those things where what we're looking at going forward is there's going to have to be some sort of integration of on-site and remote attendance. And with that, you're going to have to, plan your social distancing. So you've got a venue, you've got spaces that can handle that, where your seating configurations will address that. Then the next question comes up: how do you get funding? A lot of these, Safety Fest in particular, but the AIHA PDCs as well, are at least partially funded by vendors, because they want people to come in, put their hands on their products, get face to face with attendees. Well, how do you do that? How do you get support from vendors to be partners with you for your event? How do you get your products? How do you get your their services in front of the attendees in a way that works? So all of these are difficult things to plan. That's one of the reasons you're starting to see a lot of places that have postponed events that were planned for March, April, trying to push those back to August, September. Now you run into another issue. Everybody who had things planned in August and September already had those places booked. Now you've got other places trying to push their events back. So the windows that are available for these courses, for these PDCs, are shrinking. You've got all these conflicting events that are starting to book spaces. How do you make all that work? I can tell you that's the question we're still asking in a couple of these events.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, and the potential second wave, right, of COVID is another thing that makes August and September and October hard from a planning standpoint. But I know a lot of you guys, and I know you get the same thing. The conferences and the meetings have just as much benefit of that kind of roundtable interaction with each other and sharing of ideas and best practice and whatnot. I mean, there's some great sessions, and it's great to get with vendors and pick up some good ideas. But I for one would hate to see this go away. I'm hoping the associations get creative here and try to really figure out some alternative methods to do this with implementing some level of social distancing. Because I know I speak for a lot of people at the importance that I have placed on just regularly attending those sessions and how I've developed from that technically and professionally through the years. All right. So not to have any disrespect or diminish the tragedy of where, if you look at the numbers of COVID cases and deaths, it is absolutely a tragedy. But through this process, we all are human, and we all have the range of human emotions. So what I wanted to do was get away from the serious side for just a minute. Again, and no disrespect or diminish the tragedy, but I want to turn up the heat on our panelists a little bit and get some rapid fire questions with rapid fire answers to kind of get their far side experiences, because I know you guys have seen the full gambit. So we'll start out with Brittany. Brittany, what was the craziest interaction or story you've heard so far with one of your people from your workforce interacting with the public?
Yeah, so that would probably involve one of our gas employees. It was the very, very beginning of this whole pandemic, second week of March or so. And he gets called to go do a gas relight at a customer's house, and you have to go inside the house for that. And there's a sign right on their door that says something like, "I've been exposed to the virus, nobody come in this door, banned, off limits." So he just kind of sees that sign and is like, I'm not going in there right now. So he kind of backtrack, and they've got to get their gas relit. So everybody put their heads together, and we really didn't know that much about the virus at the time, and how bad it was going to be. So we kind of took the most conservative approach we could. So he got dressed up in Tyvek, booties, gloves, and then we put on an airline full face respirator, which he was qualified for, luckily, and brought in a leak survey truck and hooked up the airline, a huge airline hose, to the back of him. And he went in that house to restart their gas line in a full face airline respirator, all decked out and all that, kind of looked like a moon suit. But that's kind of where we were at the time. We just wanted to take the most conservative approach possible. And now we kind of have different guidelines for that now. But at the time, that was the most conservative approach I think we could have took.
That was good. And you gave him a story he can tell. Now he's now got a story that he can tell too.
Oh yeah, he has a definite story.
All right, Max. So as you were canceling in your role with the Safety Fest and AHA, I'm sure you've canceled meetings and canceled conferences, and I'm sure you've heard some replies. Can you give us kind of the most unexpected response or reply that you got?
Yeah, and actually it wasn't just one, but multiple sponsors said, hey, what you guys do is important, and we know how much you depend upon the funds of sponsors, of vendors. So just hold on to this money that we've given you for this year, roll it over into next year's plan, and we don't want our money back. We want to make sure that you guys are sustainable and that you do come back. So, we were preparing for returning funds to these people to try to, reimburse them for what they had put up front. And their whole thing was, health and safety training for our employees, for the people in our region, that's for the greater good, and we're willing to donate for that. It was awesome.
Wow. Did you say that because we asked for our money back, or is that why? Are you trying to make me feel bad about that one? Is that what
I wasn't going to say anything, but.
All right. Well, next question's for Norm. So Norm, as you said, you're increasing business. You've had all kinds of calls from people on training. So any crazy training requests that you had?
It didn't start off as sounding very crazy, but it was, do you have any training on how to conduct a professional video conference from home? And of course, we had that course, so no problems there. And the customers have seen that. And they said, it's kind of deficient because it doesn't cover some of the problems that we're seeing from our employees. And I asked, well, what are some of the things that you need us to cover? And he said, well, we've been having problems with scantily clad spouses inadvertently running around in the background, and we had some employees that are not properly groomed, and some of those things. So, obviously we really thought that should go without saying, but apparently these are some of the examples that we need to include in best practices in the course. So yeah, we thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, whoever had to write that up, I'd give them a Pulitzer Prize. That's a tough one to write.
It's a fine line. Make those suggestions. Yep.
Yeah. Well, at least you can use the word scantily. I don't know if you would ever have a chance to use that word in a training slide, but now you have a chance. All right, my next question is for John. John, I almost hate to ask you this because you're like a crazy magnet. I mean, crazy stuff just gravitates to you. So what was the most unique or challenging employee complaint or suggestion you received during this time?
All right. This one's pretty easy. Having to explain to colleagues that wearing a facial covering is not going to choke the life out of them by either depleting their oxygen levels or increased toxicity because of carbon dioxide, things like this, because they hear bits and pieces on television and they think that it's reality in life. They reporting symptoms of yawning, headaches. It makes it hard to breathe. All of the things that are true when you put on a mask if you're not used to it, but the vents are not specifically tied to either the reduced oxygen level. Now we're talking, surgical mask here, or a cloth facial cover, or toxicity level of carbon dioxide that's building up in their body. So I assured them that I've been blessed in my working career to spend many days and many weeks in much more restrictive respiratory protection devices. And I have yet to suffer from CO2 toxicity while wearing those, or having the life choked out of me because of the oxygen levels dropping. So I talked to them about adapting to the use of the mask, and you do get used to it, and assuring them that if at any time they feel threatened or that they are in some type of imminent danger, just pull the mask away from their face and come talk to a member of the safety staff, and we'll work our way through this. So it was kind of an unexpected thing, but nonetheless, legitimate questions that you get.
I hear you. I thought you were going to, as a safety and health professional, I think it's kind of funny over this time that the N95 respirator has been listing as the gold standard for respirators. And all of us as safety and health professionals are like, okay, N95 is now the gold standard, is it, for respirators, where we would have said, no, that's kind of voluntary use, don't do that. But I hear you. I've heard some of the same things. All right, Mike. So there's so much information that we get hit with all the time, right? And everybody feels like they got to read everything. So and then they pass it along to us, right? They want to play instant expert, right? Everyone wants to contribute, right? So what's the craziest kind of safety suggestion or remedy that you've been offered as advice to you in enacting your job that someone has heard somewhere?
Well, I think when the virus started, we were going with the N95, and one of the plant managers says, "I'm just going to put all my guys in face shields." And I was thinking, a virus can go around the face shield, right? It just seemed like an odd thing. Now it seems like he was probably maybe a forethinker in the concept. The Canadian government actually asked our company to participate in creating temporary face masks. Keep in mind that we take trees, we refine them to a very, very pure polymer chain, so almost a plastic out of trees. And so in participating in that, we actually made a product, and we're now using it during our shutdowns where we give them to contractors, et cetera, and it's a face shield. So I'll show you just a quick screenshot if that's possible. Can I show my screen? So that's a disposable face shield. So it looks a little like something you might see on a YouTube channel where maybe a developing country puts a jug or something on their face for a face shield, but that is a quite popular product for handouts to visitors and contractors when a cloth face covering is not available. So anyways, I thought I would share that with you as just something different. And face shields take all kinds of forms.
It's different. Definitely prevents the splash effect, but may not present the inhalation part of it.
Yeah, it's more of the moisture transfer prevention.
Yeah, it's there's, as EHS professionals, we have talked and recommended PPE for many years, and now we're starting to see some pretty interesting variations.
Right, that would not be the one, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that one before. All right, Dave. So as you talked about with communication, you attend a lot of regular Zoom calls and whatever they call, so conference calls and whatnot. Have you had a kind of going postal tipping point moment at any stretch of those of where you just couldn't take anymore? And if so, please share.
That's what after dinner drinks are for. After work drinks are for, Mike. Keeping those tipping point moments to myself, not expressing those while I'm at work, or even on a video call. No, I mean, people have been, I think, pretty tolerant of this. Again, this sort of new reality we're going through with the amount of communication, because people want information, and so it happened more organically. I'll say that we have changed, but it's happened at the right time and at the right way. So when this first began, I know I'll just anecdotally share, our operations staff was having daily COVID meetings with every facility manager and the VP of operations, and myself were on this call. And in the beginning, it didn't feel like too much to be having these daily meetings because there was something to talk about every day. What were people experiencing? What were you going through? And these practical logistical questions around, taking temperatures and, when we sending out the cleaning and sanitation materials, just a lot of stuff to talk about. And then that was like end of March through the middle of April, maybe. And then it sort of just, those meetings, we kind of go around the horn and nobody really had any questions and there were no new events. There was nothing really to talk about. And so, I mean, our VP of Ops just kind of sanely said, hey, how about we just drop back to our normal weekly cadence of an operations meeting? And everyone was like, yeah, that'll work. And so that's what we've done. And so far that's helped, I think, relieve everybody going a little ballistic on, too much COVID overload. It seems like the right cadence. So I think it's a secret, just remaining flexible and adjusting, to what the need really is.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thanks, Dave. All right, Ed, finish this up here. Kind of same type of question. Again, I know you're in a lot of calls and meetings and whatnot. Any kind of going postal tipping points that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, well, look, it's been similar to everybody else. I've been working from home for about 2 months now, and I think I put in more hours in these last 2 months than I had the last 3 months in the office. It's just been nonstop, especially with global operations and multiple meetings during the day and conference calls and you name it. And, in the heat of the moment, just happened just recently, waiting for some information. We were really engaged in these really deep thought discussions, and I'm waiting for an email that comes through. Here's a solution from Europe. And I open up, and it's two people sitting at desks because we're talking about getting back to the offices. They're enclosed in bubbles. So I'm expecting some engineering solution, and there was a light moment where he sent that, and it's like, okay, this, just take a deep breath. But it's been, it's been very daunting, and there was never that one postal moment, but it just seems like all these days blend together, and you need to build something to keep your sanity. The work is good, and we need to do all these things. And listen, we're in this field because we have a passion for protecting people, and it's something that just lives with us. And we need to remember, take time to step back, go out, water the flowers, go jump in a pool, do whatever, but make some personal time, because if you don't, it'll wear on you, it'll get to you.
I think that's great advice. Leo, do we have any burning questions that we can answer in a minute?
Yeah, we've got several questions here. We won't get to all of them, but I've got one here that I'll offer. Are your companies requiring face coverings to minimize group exposure? Also, how are global companies approaching the regional differences in filtering performance of standardized respiratory protection? So any thoughts on that?
Leo, I'll speak up. We are requiring facial coverings as soon as someone makes it into the facility. It doesn't matter if you're a visitor or not. It's not tight fitting, right? So we're not issuing N95s and things, but we're trying to limit transmission potential just by disrupting the travel path of COVID. If someone were to do a forceful cough or something out of their lungs, we're not advertising that we're preventing the spread of COVID-19. It's simply another layer of protection that we do here.
Okay, and Leo, we're gonna take people's questions and then poll our panelists and get some answers and then send them back out to people, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you submitted a question and we hadn't answered it, we'll email you an answer. We've got a name associated with almost all these questions here, so we will respond back to you.
Okay, so we'll ask one more thing of our panelists there by seeing if we'll send out the questions and try to get some answers. So I want to somewhat keep timely here, so I wanted to, first of all, thank our panelists. I am honored and grateful that I call these people my clients, colleagues, and friends, and I so much appreciate your all's time and sharing of what you've done. Your pearls of wisdom of strategies and lessons learned. I think that it accomplished exactly what I was hoping for with that. I want to thank everyone else that joined today for your time. Now everyone's busy, as Ed said, and to give us an hour of your time, really, really appreciate that. And I hope that you're able to take some information back that you can apply to your workplaces as we try to, navigate our way to this pandemic and managing safety in this new era. Lastly, I'd like to, encourage everyone to remember the traits that I think we really, really need to demonstrate as EHS professionals at this time. I think we need to be, and some of these have been said, we need to be patient, we need to be kind, and we need to be empathetic as we individually and collectively navigate our way to this new normal and managing safety during a pandemic. So please, all of us, I think, keep that in mind, as many of us have said. With that, I'll close and wish you and yours the best of health and safety, and God bless you and keep you.